What person turned out to be someone completely different that really surprised you? I was standing in my best friend's bedroom at 2:30 a.m., holding a passport that said his name was Aaron Whitmore, not Liam Fletcher, when I heard his key turn in the apartment door. The passport photo showed his face, younger and harder somehow, staring back at me with an expression I'd never seen him wear in the 4 years I'd known him. In my other hand was a newspaper clipping from 2018, yellowed and carefully folded, showing that same face under a headline about a missing suspect in a financial fraud case. My heart hammered against my ribs as I heard him call out, "Elliot, you still up?" I'd come into his room looking for phone charger cables, opened the wrong drawer in his desk, and found a locked metal box that wasn't actually locked because he'd left the key in it. Inside were documents that proved the person I'd been living with, working with, building a business with, calling my brother for 4 years, was someone else entirely. Someone who'd disappeared from Seattle after allegedly embezzling $800,000 from a tech startup. Someone who had a wife and daughter he'd abandoned. Someone whose real name I'd never even known. I'd been sharing an apartment with Liam since our sophomore year of college in 2019, when we'd been randomly assigned as roommates in the campus housing lottery at the University of Vermont. He was this easygoing guy from Portland, Oregon, studying computer science like me, with a quick wit and an easier laugh that made him instantly likable. We'd bonded over late-night coding sessions, shared taste in obscure indie music, and a mutual hatred of our algorithms professor, who spoke in incomprehensible monotone for 90 minutes twice a week. By junior year, we'd deliberately chosen to room together again, and by the time we graduated in 2022, we'd started a small web development company together, renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Burlington and taking on freelance clients while we built our business. Fletcher Digital Solutions had been my idea, but Liam had been the one to make it real, handling client relations with a charm I didn't possess while I focused on the technical work. We'd grown the company to the point where we were making decent money, enough to upgrade to a nicer apartment last year and hire 2 junior developers. I trusted Liam with everything, our business finances, our apartment lease, our future plans. He was the brother I'd never had, my business partner, my best friend, the person I told everything to, who knew my hopes and fears and dreams. Except apparently, I'd never actually known him at all. The apartment door closed, and I heard Liam's footsteps heading toward the kitchen. "Just grabbing water," he called out. Long night at the Clark's place. Their daughter's graduation party went way later than expected. He'd been at a client dinner, or so he'd said. I stood frozen in his bedroom, documents spread across his desk, my mind racing through 4 years of memories and conversations, looking for signs I'd missed. How had I never noticed? How had I never questioned anything? I thought about all the times I'd suggested visiting his family in Portland, and he'd made excuses about his parents being busy or traveling or going through a rough patch. About how he never wanted to video call them, always just stepping into another room for quick phone conversations. About how he had no social media presence, which he'd explained as wanting to maintain privacy and avoid distractions. About the way he'd sometimes freeze when old college acquaintances tried to friend him on LinkedIn, always declining with vague excuses about keeping his professional network small. I'd thought he was just private, maybe a little odd about technology for someone in our field, but not suspicious. Never suspicious. I heard him moving around in the kitchen, heard the refrigerator open and close, heard him humming something under his breath. In about 30 seconds, he'd wonder where I was, might come looking for me, might find me standing here surrounded by evidence of his deception. I needed to make a decision right now, confront him and demand answers, or pretend I'd never found any of this and figure out what to do later. I chose later. I shoved everything back into the metal box, locked it, pocketed the key without thinking, and walked out of his bedroom as casually as I could manage. My hands were shaking so badly I had to jam them into my pockets. Liam was standing by the kitchen counter with a glass of water, scrolling through his phone, looking exactly like he always did. 32 years old, though I'd thought he was 26 like me, with that perpetually slightly messy brown hair and the easy smile that made clients love him. "Hey, thought you'd be asleep by now," he said, glancing up. "You okay? You look kinda pale." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Yeah, just tired. Been coding for like 6 hours straight. Deadline tomorrow for the Morrison site." That was a lie. The Morrison site was done, but Liam just nodded sympathetically. "Brutal. You should get some sleep, man. I'm going to crash too." He headed toward his bedroom, and I went to mine, closing the door and leaning against it, my heart still pounding. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone, Googling Aaron Whitmore Seattle Embezzlement 2018 with trembling fingers. The results loaded immediately. Multiple news articles from Seattle Times, King County court records, even a Reddit thread about the case. Aaron Whitmore, aged 28 at the time, had been the CFO of a promising startup called Tech Vista Solutions. Over 18 months, he'd systematically diverted company funds into offshore accounts through a complex scheme of fake vendors and doctored invoices. When the fraud was discovered during a routine audit, the total missing amount was estimated at $843,000. By the time authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, Aaron Whitmore had vanished, leaving behind his wife, Jessica, and their 3-year-old daughter, Sophia. The last confirmed sighting was his car abandoned at SeaTac Airport. I scrolled through photos of Aaron Whitmore from 2018. The face was unmistakably Liam's, just younger and sharper, wearing expensive suits and corporate headshots, smiling next to his wife at company events. There were photos of the wife, too, a pretty blonde woman who looked devastated in the interview she'd given to local news after he disappeared. She talked about how he'd become distant in the months before he vanished, how she'd noticed irregularities in their personal finances, how she'd confronted him, and he'd assured her everything was fine. Then one morning she woke up and he was gone, along with his passport, some clothes, and apparently $843,000. The FBI had been involved because the money had crossed state lines and possibly international borders. The case was still technically open, though the trail had gone completely cold after 2019. I sat there reading article after article until 4 a.m., my mind reeling with the implications. The person sleeping in the next room had committed serious crimes, had abandoned his family, had built an entirely new identity, and had lied to me about absolutely everything for 4 years. I'd shared my life with a fugitive. I'd built a business with someone using a fake name. Everything we'd done together, every contract we'd signed, every bank account we'd opened for Fletcher Digital Solutions was built on fraud. If this came out, would I be implicated? Would I lose everything we'd built? Would I go to jail for unknowingly harboring a fugitive? I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake with another question, another realization, another memory that suddenly looked different through this new lens. In the morning, I heard Liam moving around, making coffee in the kitchen like it was any normal Friday. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of his routine, the routine I'd observed 1,000 times, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. At 8:30 a.m., he knocked on my door. "Elliot, you awake? We've got that call with the new client at 9. I'd completely forgotten about the call. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on acceptable clothes, and joined him in our home office, the second bedroom we'd converted into a workspace with 2 desks facing each other. Liam was already on his laptop, pulling up the client proposal we'd prepared. He looked perfectly normal, perfectly himself, perfectly like the person I'd trusted completely until 12 hours ago. We took the call, smiled professionally at the camera, discussed the project scope and timeline, quoted our rates. I went through the motions on autopilot while my mind screamed that everything about this was wrong, that I was sitting across from a criminal, that the business we were pitching was built on a foundation of lies. The client, a local restaurant owner named David Nguyen, seemed impressed and said he'd have an answer for us by Monday. Liam ended the call with his usual charm, then turned to me with a satisfied grin. "I think we've got that one." He seemed really into the portfolio pieces we showed. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Liam studied my face for a moment, his expression shifting to concern. "Dude, seriously, are you feeling okay? You've been weird since last night." This was the moment. I could ask him directly, could lay out what I'd found and demand the truth. But something held me back, some survival instinct that said confronting him alone in our apartment was a terrible idea. I had no idea who this person really was, what he was capable of, whether he'd become violent if cornered. "I think I'm coming down with something," I said instead. "Maybe that flu that's been going around. I'm going to take it easy today, maybe see if I can get a doctor's appointment." Liam's concern looked genuine, which made everything worse somehow. "Yeah, definitely. Take care of yourself. I can handle the client emails and the code review for the Jensen project. You just rest." I retreated to my bedroom and spent the morning researching what I was legally obligated to do if I knew someone was a fugitive. The answer was complicated. I wasn't required to turn him in immediately, but knowingly harboring a fugitive could potentially make me an accessory after the fact, especially if I continued to help him in any way. Our business partnership, our shared finances, the apartment lease we'd both signed, everything could be considered providing assistance to a fugitive. I needed legal advice, but I couldn't exactly call a lawyer and ask hypothetically about my roommate being a wanted criminal. That afternoon, while Liam was out meeting another client, I went back into his bedroom. This time I was methodical, searching through everything with the kind of thoroughness I should have applied to our business contracts. I found more documents in that locked box that I now had the key to: a birth certificate for Aaron Whitmore, a marriage license, divorce papers that had never been filed because he'd vanished before that happened, and most damning of all, a flash drive. I took the flash drive back to my room and plugged it into my laptop. It was password protected, but I knew Liam's passwords. He'd given them to me years ago for business purposes, trusting me the way I'd trusted him. The irony wasn't lost on me. The password worked. The drive contained financial records from Tech Vista Solutions, spreadsheets showing the embezzlement scheme in meticulous detail, emails between Aaron Whitmore and shell companies, banking information for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He'd kept all of it, every piece of evidence that could convict him, stored on a flash drive in a locked box in his bedroom. Why would someone keep that? Insurance? Inability to let go of his old life? I didn't understand, but I had it now. I had proof. I spent hours copying everything to my own encrypted cloud storage, making sure I had backups of backups. Then I started searching for people who might help me figure out what to do. I found the FBI agent who'd been the lead investigator on Aaron Whitmore's case, Special Agent Monica Reeves, based out of the Seattle field office. She had a LinkedIn profile listing her as part of the Economic Crimes Unit, 23 years with the Bureau. I drafted an email to her 3 different times, deleted it each time, unable to commit to sending it. Turning in Liam, or Aaron, or whoever he really was, meant destroying our business, possibly implicating myself, definitely losing my best friend, even if that friendship had been built on lies. But not turning him in meant I was complicit. Meant I was helping a fugitive who'd stolen nearly $1 million and abandoned his family. Meant I was becoming part of the crime. That evening, Liam ordered pizza for dinner like he did most Fridays, his treat to celebrate getting through the week. We sat on our couch eating pizza and watching the Celtics game, the same routine we'd had for years. Except now I was hyper-aware of every word he said, every gesture, looking for the cracks in his performance. "You know what I was thinking?" Liam said during halftime. "We should really start planning that expansion we talked about. Maybe hire 2 more developers, move into actual office space downtown, really make Fletcher Digital Solutions a legitimate company." Fletcher Digital Solutions. Our company. Named after his fake last name. Everything about our partnership was a lie, built on his stolen identity. "Yeah, maybe," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We should probably talk to an accountant about the financial implications first." "Good point. I'll set something up next week." He said it so casually, like he wasn't a man who'd embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars and fled across the country. Like he hadn't spent 4 years deceiving me about literally everything. I excused myself early, claiming I still felt sick, and lay in my bed staring at the ceiling for hours. Around midnight, I heard Liam's bedroom door close, heard the apartment settle into nighttime quiet. I got up, opened my laptop, and sent the email to Special Agent Monica Reeves. I kept it simple. I had information about Aaron Whitmore's current location and identity, and I needed to speak with her as soon as possible. I included my phone number and email address, then closed my laptop and tried to sleep, knowing I'd just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Agent Reeves called me at 7:45 a.m. on Saturday morning. I was already awake, having barely slept, and I answered on the first ring. "Elliot Hammond?" Her voice was professional, brisk, the voice of someone who'd been doing this job for 2 decades. "This is Special Agent Monica Reeves from the FBI Seattle Field Office. I received your email regarding Aaron Whitmore. I need to verify some information before we proceed. Can you confirm you're calling from Vermont, and you believe you have information about his current whereabouts?" My mouth was dry. "Yes, I'm in Burlington, Vermont. I've been living with him for 4 years. He's been using the name Liam Fletcher." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You've been living with him for 4 years, and you're just now reporting this?" "I just found out last night who he really is. I had no idea before that." I could hear typing on her end, rapid and precise. "Okay, Mr. Hammond. I need you to listen carefully. Do not confront him about this. Do not let him know you've contacted law enforcement. We need to verify your information and coordinate with local authorities before we approach him. Can you tell me where he is right now?" "He's asleep in the next room. We share a 2-bedroom apartment on North Street." More typing. "Is he likely to be there for the next few hours?" "He doesn't usually leave on Saturday mornings until around 10 or 11. "Good. I'm going to patch in Detective Lawrence Kimball from the Burlington Police Department. He'll coordinate the local response while I arrange to fly out today. Do not leave the apartment. Do not do anything that might alert Whitmore. Can you do that?" I said yes, even though every instinct screamed to pack a bag and get out of there. Agent Reeves connected me with Detective Kimball, a man with a slow Vermont drawl who'd been with Burlington PD for 19 years. He asked me to describe the apartment layout, where Liam's bedroom was in relation to mine, whether there were weapons in the apartment, whether Liam had shown any signs of violence or paranoia. I answered as best I could, my voice shaking slightly. No weapons that I knew of. No violence. No paranoia. Just a normal guy who happened to be living under a completely fake identity. Detective Kimball told me to sit tight and act normal. Officers would be stationed outside the building within the hour, but they wouldn't approach until Agent Reeves arrived, and they had a proper plan. In the meantime, I needed to behave exactly as I would on any other Saturday morning. Don't raise suspicions. Don't give him any reason to run. I sat in my room with my door locked, listening to Liam wake up around 9 a.m., listening to him make coffee and turn on the television in the living room. Every sound made me flinch. At 9:30, he knocked on my door. "Elliot, you want coffee? I'm making a pot." I opened the door, forcing normalcy into my expression. "Yeah, thanks. Still feeling kind of rough, but coffee would be good." We sat in the living room drinking coffee and watching weekend news shows, the same Saturday morning routine we'd had countless times before. Except this time, I knew federal agents were on their way, knew police were probably already watching the building, knew that in a few hours my best friend's fake life would come crashing down. Liam scrolled through his phone, occasionally commenting on something he saw, completely oblivious. Around 11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Agent Reeves, I'm 20 minutes out. Detective Kimball is coordinating with local units. Stay inside and stay calm." I responded with a simple, "Okay," and set my phone down, my hands trembling. "You all right?" Liam asked, glancing over at me. "You're shaking." "Just cold," I lied. "Maybe I've got a fever." He reached over and pressed the back of his hand to my forehead, the gesture so familiar and brotherly that I almost lost it. You do feel warm. You should probably see a doctor if this keeps up. This man who'd lied to me about everything, who'd stolen from his company and abandoned his family, still showed genuine concern for my well-being. Or maybe that was a performance too. Maybe everything had always been a performance. At 11:15 a.m., there was a loud knock on the apartment door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or delivery person, but the authoritative knock of law enforcement. Liam looked at me, confused, then stood up and moved toward the door. "Who is it?" he called out. "Burlington Police Department. We need to speak with the residents of this apartment. Please open the door." I watched Liam's face change in that instant. The confusion disappeared, replaced by something harder and more calculated. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the exact moment he understood I'd turned him in. His expression didn't show anger or betrayal, just a kind of resigned understanding. "You found it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Open the door, Liam, or should I call you Aaron?" The knocking came again, louder this time. "Police, open the door now, or we're coming in." Liam held my gaze for another second, then walked to the door and opened it. 5 officers poured into our apartment, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Liam raised his hands immediately, dropping to his knees without resistance as they swarmed him. Within 30 seconds, he was handcuffed face down on our living room floor, officers reading him his Miranda rights while he stared at the carpet with that same resigned expression. Detective Kimball entered last, a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He looked at me where I'd pressed myself against the wall, out of the way. "Elliot Hammond?" I nodded. "I'm Detective Kimball. Agent Reeves will be here shortly. These officers are going to secure the premises and collect evidence. I need you to step outside with me and give a statement." I followed him out into the hallway, my legs feeling like they might give out. Neighbors had emerged from other apartments, drawn by the commotion, their faces curious and shocked. The building manager, Mrs. Kowalski, stood near the stairs demanding to know what was happening. Detective Kimball escorted me down to the parking lot where several police cruisers were parked, their lights off, but their presence overwhelming. He had me sit in the back of an unmarked car, not under arrest, but for privacy, and started asking questions. I told him everything. About finding the documents last night, about the flash drive with the financial records, about the 4 years I'd known Liam as my roommate and business partner. Detective Kimball took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification. Did he ever discuss his past? His family? Where he came from? He said his family was in Portland, Oregon. Said his parents were kind of distant, that he had a younger brother he didn't talk to much. Said he'd gone to Portland State before transferring to UVM. All of it was lies. Did you ever meet anyone who knew him before college? I thought about it. No. He said he didn't keep in touch with people from before, that he liked to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. I just thought he was a private person. Detective Kimball nodded like he'd heard this before. That's common with people running from their past. They create completely new identities, new histories, and avoid anyone who might contradict their story. You had no reason to suspect because he was careful. That was supposed to make me feel better, but it didn't. I'd lived with this person for 4 years and never once questioned his story. Agent Reeves arrived at 12:30 p.m., pulling up in a black SUV and striding toward us with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She was in her late 40s, tall and sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. "Mr. Hammond," she said, extending her hand. "Special Agent Monica Reeves, thank you for contacting us. I know this must be difficult." She sat down with me and Detective Kimball, and we went through everything again, more detailed this time. She was particularly interested in the flash drive, which I'd already handed over to the police. "This kind of record-keeping is unusual," she said. "Most fugitives destroy evidence. The fact that he kept it suggests either incredible arrogance or some kind of insurance policy. We'll need to analyze everything thoroughly." "What happens now?" I asked. Agent Reeves glanced at Detective Kimball, then back to me. "Aaron Whitmore will be processed here and then transferred to federal custody. He'll be extradited to Washington State to face charges. The evidence you've provided will be crucial to the case. You'll likely be called as a witness." "What about our business? Fletcher Digital Solutions? Is that all illegal now?" "That's complicated. You'll need to consult with a lawyer about the business implications. The company was founded under a false identity, which creates legal issues. But you weren't aware of his real identity, so you're not criminally liable. Civil liability is a different question." "Great. I just lost my best friend, my business partner, and possibly my company, all in one morning." Agent Reeves continued. "I need to ask you some difficult questions about your relationship with Whitmore. Did he ever discuss finances in detail? Did he have access to significant amounts of money? Did he ever suggest he had assets beyond what his visible income would support?" I thought back through 4 years of shared life. He always seemed to have money, but I figured it was from his family. He'd said his parents were well off. When we started the business, he contributed $20,000 as startup capital. I only put in $10,000. He said it was money he'd saved from internships and his parents had helped. Agent Reeves made a note. "That $20,000 was likely part of the embezzled funds. We'll need to trace it." "So our entire business is built on stolen money?" "Partially, yes. Again, You'll need a lawyer to sort out the business implications. I sat there absorbing this information, watching police officers come and go from our building, seeing my neighbors stare at the scene unfolding. My phone started buzzing with texts from people who'd seen the police activity or heard through the building's gossip network. I ignored them all. Around 1 p.m., they brought Liam, or Aaron, out in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. As they walked him toward a police cruiser, he turned his head and looked directly at me. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not pleading, just sad. Like he'd known this day would come eventually, and was almost relieved it was finally here. Then they put him in the back of the cruiser and drove away. I'd never see him as a free man again. The next week was a blur of statements, interviews, and lawyers. I retained an attorney named Rebecca Singh, 38 years old with 15 years of experience in business law, to help me navigate the catastrophic mess that Fletcher Digital Solutions had become. She reviewed all our business documents, our contracts, our financial records, and gave me the grim news. Technically, the business was founded by a person using a fraudulent identity, she explained during our second meeting. That creates significant legal complications. Contracts signed by Liam Fletcher may not be legally binding because that person doesn't exist. Your business license, your tax filings, everything with his name on it is potentially invalid. What about the clients we've served? The work we've done? That's legitimate work, but the question is, who has the legal right to the business and its assets? You're a genuine person using your real identity. Aaron Whitmore contributed stolen funds under a false name. This is going to take months to sort out, possibly years. I felt sick. 4 years of work, gone. Our growing client base, our reputation, everything we'd built, all contaminated by his fraud. Rebecca filed paperwork to dissolve the partnership and establish me as the sole owner of a restructured company. But it was complicated by the fact that half our assets might be considered proceeds from Whitmore's crimes. The FBI had frozen our business accounts pending investigation. I couldn't access our shared money, couldn't pay our junior developers, couldn't fulfill existing contracts. Within 2 weeks, both developers had quit, finding positions elsewhere. Clients started dropping us when word got out about the situation. The local news ran a story about Aaron Whitmore's capture in Burlington after 4 years on the run, and Fletcher Digital Solutions was mentioned prominently as the business he'd been operating under a false identity. I had to move out of our apartment. I couldn't afford it alone, and I couldn't stand living in the space we'd shared, surrounded by memories that were now poisoned by the truth. I found a studio apartment across town, smaller and cheaper, and moved my belongings in a single afternoon with help from my brother Nate, who'd driven up from Boston when he heard what happened. I never liked that guy, Nate said as we carried boxes up to my new place. That was a lie. Nate had thought Liam was great, had told me multiple times I was lucky to have such a solid business partner. But I appreciated the retroactive skepticism. You couldn't have known, Nate continued. He fooled everyone. He was a professional con artist. That was the thing, though. Aaron Whitmore hadn't been a professional con artist. He'd been a CFO who'd made a series of terrible decisions, stolen money to cover his tracks, and then panicked and run when he got caught. The new identity, the years of deception, that had all been improvised. And he'd pulled it off because he'd chosen to hide in plain sight, building a normal life with a normal person in a normal town, betting that nobody would look twice at a computer science student in Vermont. 3 months after his arrest, I was called to testify before a grand jury in Seattle. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Wolfe, 20 years in the DOJ with a specialty in white-collar crime, walked me through everything I knew. The grand jury indicted Aaron Whitmore on 14 counts including wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. His trial was scheduled for 6 months later. Jessica Whitmore, Aaron's wife, who was technically still married to him since he'd never filed for divorce, reached out to me through the prosecutor's office. She wanted to talk, to understand what had happened, to know who her husband had become after he disappeared. We met at a coffee shop in Seattle, where I'd flown for depositions related to the case. Jessica was 36 now, still pretty, but with lines of stress around her eyes that hadn't been there in the photos from 2018. Her daughter Sophia was 7, in school, being raised by a single mother who'd been abandoned without explanation 4 years ago. I don't understand how he could just leave us, Jessica said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. How he could start a whole new life and never look back. Did he ever mention us? Did he ever seem guilty or conflicted? I didn't know how to answer that. He never mentioned you. He said his family was in Portland, that they were distant. I had no idea you existed until I found the documents. She absorbed this, her expression crumbling slightly. So he just erased us, erased me and Sophia like we never mattered. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I'm sorry. Jessica looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Did he seem happy? In his new life with you? The question caught me off guard. Yeah, he did. He seemed like a normal guy who enjoyed his work and his life. He was a good friend. Or I thought he was. That's the part I can't reconcile, she said. The man I married was kind and thoughtful. He was a good father. Then something changed in those last months before he disappeared. He became distant and secretive. I thought maybe he was having an affair, but it was worse than that. He was stealing from his company and planning to abandon us. We talked for 2 hours. Jessica told me about their marriage, about the Aaron Whitmore she'd known before everything fell apart. He'd been ambitious, maybe too ambitious, always chasing the next opportunity, the next promotion, the next financial milestone. When he'd become CFO of Tech Vista Solutions, it was supposed to be his big break. But the company had financial problems he'd hidden from the board, and rather than admit failure, he'd started moving money around to make things look better than they were. It had spiraled from there. The FBI said he took $843,000, Jessica said, but we never saw any of it. Our house was mortgaged, our cars were leased, we had maybe $20,000 in savings. Where did all that money go? I thought about the flash drive, about the offshore accounts. He had it in banks in the Cayman Islands and other places. The FBI is still tracing it. He used $20,000 to invest in our business, but the rest is still missing. Can we get it back, for Sophia's future? The prosecutors are trying to recover the assets, but it's complicated because the money's been moving through multiple accounts for years. Jessica nodded, resigned to the answer she'd probably already known. Will you testify at his trial? Yes. The prosecution needs me to establish his identity and his activities over the past 4 years. Good. He should face consequences for what he did. To the company, to you, to us. She paused. I used to hope he was dead. That was easier than thinking he'd chosen to leave us. Now I know he built a whole new life and was perfectly happy while Sophia asked every day when Daddy was coming home. The pain in her voice was raw and real, and I felt complicit in it somehow, even though I'd been deceived too. The trial began in March, 8 months after Aaron's arrest. I flew to Seattle and spent 2 days in a courtroom watching the prosecution build their case. They had the financial records I'd found, the offshore account information, testimony from Tech Vista Solutions auditors who'd uncovered the fraud, and testimony from FBI forensic accountants who'd traced the money's path. Aaron's defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Kowalski, with 25 years of criminal defense experience, tried to argue that Aaron had been under extreme pressure, that the company had been failing, and he'd made desperate decisions to save jobs, that he'd always intended to pay the money back. The prosecution tore that apart. Assistant U.S. Attorney Wolf presented evidence that Aaron had been siphoning money for his personal benefit long before the company had any financial troubles, that he'd set up the offshore accounts 6 months before anyone suspected fraud, that his flight demonstrated consciousness of guilt. When I took the stand, Jennifer Wolf walked me through my testimony methodically. I explained how I'd met Liam Fletcher in college, how we'd become friends and business partners, how I'd discovered his real identity. Aaron's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, trying to suggest I'd known more than I claimed, that I'd benefited from his crimes through our business. But I had documentation proving I'd reported him immediately upon discovery, that I'd cooperated fully with authorities, that I'd lost my business because of his fraud. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Aaron Whitmore guilty on all 14 counts. His sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. At sentencing, Jessica gave a victim impact statement describing the devastation his abandonment had caused. Sophia had needed therapy. Jessica had lost their house when she couldn't make mortgage payments alone. She'd had to rebuild her life from scratch while dealing with debt collectors and investigators and her daughter's trauma. Other victims testified too. Former Tech Vista Solutions employees who'd lost their jobs when the company collapsed after the fraud was discovered. Investors who'd lost money. The impact had been far-reaching. Aaron had the opportunity to speak before sentencing. He stood in his orange jumpsuit, thinner than I remembered, and addressed the court in a voice I recognized, but that sounded hollow. I know nothing I say can undo the harm I've caused. I made terrible decisions driven by fear and pride. I told myself I was protecting my family and my company, but really, I was only protecting myself. When I got caught, I panicked and ran instead of facing consequences. I built a new life based on lies, and I destroyed anyone who trusted me in that life too. He looked directly at me in the courtroom gallery. Elliot, I'm sorry. You were a true friend, and I repaid that friendship with deception. You deserved better. The words felt empty. Sorry didn't give me back 4 years of genuine friendship. Sorry didn't restore the business we'd built. Sorry didn't repair the damage to everyone's lives. Judge Patricia Cordova, 63 years old and 26 years on the federal bench, was unmoved by Aaron's apology. Mr. Whitmore, you committed serious crimes and then compounded them by fleeing justice and building an entire false life. You showed no remorse until you were caught. You destroyed your family, your victim's financial security, and an innocent man's business. This court must send a message that such behavior has severe consequences. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with restitution of $843,000 plus interest to be paid to the victims. He'd serve at least 10 years before being eligible for parole. I watched as marshals led him away. He didn't look back. Outside the courtroom, Agent Reeves found me. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Hammond. I know this has been difficult, but your testimony was crucial. What happens to the money? The assets from the offshore accounts? We've recovered about $600,000 so far. It'll be distributed to victims proportionally. Jessica Whitmore will receive the largest share as his spouse, but other victims will get something too. You might receive a small amount given that your business was partially funded with stolen money, though that'll be determined by the victim's compensation board. I don't want it, I said. I just want to move on. Agent Reeves nodded sympathetically. Understandable. For what it's worth, you did the right thing by reporting him. A lot of people in your position would have looked the other way, especially given your friendship and business relationship. You chose integrity, and that matters. I appreciated the sentiment, but it didn't make me feel better. I'd lost my best friend and my business. Doing the right thing had cost me nearly everything. I flew back to Vermont the next day. My restructured company, now operating as Hammond Digital Services, was slowly rebuilding. I'd taken on new clients, hired one developer, was working out of my studio apartment because I couldn't afford office space. It was a fraction of what Fletcher Digital Solutions had been, but it was mine, built on truth instead of lies. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Aaron. He'd been transferred to a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania, and he'd written asking if I'd visit. I stared at the letter for 3 days before responding. I didn't owe him anything. He'd deceived me, used me, destroyed what we'd built together. But part of me needed closure, needed to understand how someone could live a lie so completely. I drove to Pennsylvania on a Saturday morning, sat in a waiting room with other visitors, and eventually was escorted into a visitation area where Aaron sat behind plexiglass, looking gaunt and tired. We picked up phones to talk, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Thanks for coming," he finally said. "I didn't think you would." I almost didn't. "What do you want, Aaron?" He flinched at the name, like he still wasn't used to being called that again. I wanted to explain. Not to excuse what I did, but to help you understand. "Okay, explain." He took a breath. "When I stole that money, I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back before anyone noticed. But the amounts got bigger, and the lies got more complex, and then the audit happened, and I knew I was going to prison. I panicked. I thought if I disappeared, started over somewhere new, I could build a legitimate life and eventually make things right. So I researched how to create a new identity, found a dead guy named Liam Fletcher, who'd been born the same year as me, used his information to get documents, and flew to Vermont because it was small and far from Seattle. And you just happened to end up as my roommate? That was luck, or fate, or something. When we got assigned as roommates, I was terrified you'd figure out I was too old to be a sophomore. But you never questioned it. You accepted my story, and we became friends, and that friendship was real, Elliot. That's what I need you to understand. Everything else was a lie, but our friendship was genuine." I laughed bitterly. "How can it be genuine when I didn't know who you really were? I was friends with Liam Fletcher. That person doesn't exist." "Liam Fletcher was just a name. The person you knew, the person who stayed up coding with you, who built that business with you, who cared about you. That was real. That was me, just without the baggage of my past. The baggage of your past includes a wife and daughter you abandoned. Aaron. It includes crimes that destroyed people's lives. You don't get to compartmentalize that away and claim the good parts were real." He nodded slowly, accepting the point. "You're right. I just wanted you to know that I never meant to hurt you. You got caught in the fallout of choices I made years before we met, and I'm sorry for that." We talked for another 30 minutes. He told me about prison life, about the therapy he was required to attend, about writing letters to Sophia that Jessica wouldn't let her read yet. He said he thought about our business sometimes, about the plans we'd made, about the future that would never happen now. When visiting hours ended, we said goodbye. I knew I'd never visit again. This was closure, such as it was. Driving back to Vermont, I thought about identity and truth. Aaron Whitmore had tried to become someone else, to shed his crimes and his past like a snake shedding skin. For 4 years, he'd succeeded. He'd been Liam Fletcher so completely that I'd never suspected anything was wrong. But the past always catches up eventually. The truth always surfaces. You can't build a real life on a foundation of lies. A year after his sentencing, I was sitting in my small office, now an actual rented space I could finally afford, when I got an email from Jessica. Sophia had started therapy to process her father's abandonment and return. She was doing better, beginning to understand what had happened in age-appropriate ways. Jessica had started dating someone new, a kind man who treated her and Sophia well. She'd received her portion of the recovered assets, about $420,000, and used it to buy a small house and start a college fund for Sophia. She thanked me again for reporting Aaron, for helping bring him to justice. "I know you lost a lot too," she wrote, "your business and your friendship. But you did the right thing, and that matters more than you might realize right now. Sophia will grow up knowing that there are people who choose to do the right thing even when it costs them. That's a valuable lesson." I appreciated the message, though I still struggled with the cost of doing the right thing. My business was stable now but not thriving. I had clients and steady income, but it was nothing like what Fletcher Digital Solutions had been building toward. I'd lost 4 years of my life to a friendship and partnership that had been fundamentally fraudulent. But I'd also learned something valuable about myself. When confronted with a terrible choice, when I could have looked the other way and preserved my business and my comfortable life, I'd chosen to report the truth. That said something about my character, something I could be proud of even when the consequences hurt. 2 years after Aaron's sentencing, I was meeting with a new client at a coffee shop when I saw someone who looked familiar. A woman in her late 20s, dark hair, professional attire, sitting alone with a laptop. It took me a moment to place her, and then it clicked. She'd been in one of my computer science classes junior year, had done a group project with Liam and me. Her name was Kendra something. I walked over hesitantly. Kendra? I don't know if you remember me. Elliot Hammond. We had a class together at UVM. She looked up, recognition dawning on her face. Elliot. Of course I remember. You and Liam were partners on that database project. Her smile faded slightly. I heard what happened with him. That was wild. I'm sorry you got caught up in that. Yeah, it was complicated. But I'm doing okay now. We talked for a few minutes. She'd graduated and moved to Burlington for work, was considering hiring a web developer for her company's site. I gave her my business card, mentioned Hammond Digital Services. 2 weeks later, she became a client. That project led to referrals. Those referrals led to more work. Slowly, methodically, I rebuilt what I'd lost. But this time it was genuinely mine, built on my own reputation and work, not on a partnership with a fugitive using a stolen identity. 3 years after turning him in, Aaron became eligible for early release programs. He'd served 1/4 of his sentence with good behavior. Jessica called me when she heard, panicked about what it might mean. But the parole board denied his release. The severity of his crimes and the duration of his flight from justice weighed against him. He'd serve at least the full 10 years before they'd consider it again. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted him to suffer for what he'd done to everyone. Part of me remembered the friend I'd thought I'd known and felt a distant sadness for the life he'd destroyed. Mostly, I felt relief that I wouldn't have to worry about encountering him in Vermont when he got out. 4 years after the trial, Hammond Digital Services had grown to 6 employees. We'd moved into a real office space downtown with a view of Lake Champlain. I'd been featured in a local business journal article about entrepreneurs who'd overcome adversity. I'd started dating someone, a graphic designer named Allison who knew my whole story and didn't judge me for the complicated mess of trust and betrayal. Life was good, or at least good enough. Then one day, I received a package from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Inside was a letter from Aaron and something else, the key to the metal box I'd taken from his room 4 years ago. I'd forgotten about that key, had probably thrown it away or lost it in the chaos of moving. But he'd kept track of it somehow. The letter was short. Elliot, I've had a lot of time to think in here, about the choices I made, the people I hurt, the life I destroyed. I understand now that becoming Liam Fletcher wasn't about starting over. It was about running from myself, from my guilt, from the consequences of my actions. You couldn't run from who you really were, even if you changed your name and your story. The truth has a way of catching up. You were a good friend to Liam Fletcher. I'm sorry Aaron Whitmore destroyed that friendship. I hope you've built a good life without me in it. You deserve that. The key is symbolic more than practical, but I wanted you to have it back. A reminder that secrets always get unlocked eventually. Thank you for doing what I couldn't do myself, facing the truth. I sat with that letter for a long time, reading it over and over, looking for hidden meanings or manipulations. But it seemed genuine, the words of someone who'd finally accepted responsibility for his choices. The person who'd turned out to be completely different than I'd thought had spent 4 years in prison becoming different again, this time, hopefully, into someone better. I never wrote back. There was nothing left to say between us. But I kept the letter and the key in a drawer in my desk, a reminder of the strangest and most painful lesson I'd ever learned. You can live with someone, work with someone, trust someone completely, and still not know the first thing about who they really are. 5 years after I'd stood in Liam Fletcher's bedroom holding Aaron Whitmore's passport, I was exactly where I'd been before I met him. Building a business, living in Burlington, working in web development. But I was different, more cautious about trust, more careful about partnerships, more aware that people contain depths and secrets and past lives that might never surface until the moment they do. And when someone asked me, as they occasionally did at networking events or social gatherings, about the person who'd turned out to be completely different than I'd thought, I told them about Liam Fletcher, who became my best friend and business partner, who built a life with me for 4 years, who turned out to be Aaron Whitmore, a fugitive who'd stolen nearly $1 million and abandoned his family. The person who taught me that you can never truly know anyone, that the past always catches up, and that sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything you've built, but keeping the one thing that matters most, your integrity. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.